This large format painting of the healing of the blind Tobias, completed by Peter Johann Brandl around 1705, and now in the National Gallery in Prague, is one of the major works of Bohemian Baroque painting. The picture tells the story, much favored in European Baroque art, of the blind Tobias as told in the Old Testament book of Tobit. According to this story, the old Tobias is blinded by sparrows' droppings. So his son, also called Tobias, undertakes a long journey, accompanied by the archangel Raphael, in the course of which he visits the river Tigris and catches a fish whose bile he keeps, on the angel's advice, as a salve for his father's eyes. When the young Tobias returns to his parents' house, this medicine heals his father. The painting shows this miracle. The young Tobias carefully lays the bile on the blind eyes of his father, who sits before him. The biblical account says, "Then he applied the medicine, let it work for a time, and finally, using both hands, he peeled away the whiteness from the corners of his eyes." Then his father fell upon his neck. He wept and cried out, "I see you, my son, the light of my eyes." The beginning of this miraculous event is depicted with great dramatic tension. The hand and arm of young Tobias reveal a delicate painterly glow. The difference between young and old skin is emphasized. The flesh tones are warmly lit. The kind of lighting used creates a quite theatrical effect. In the foreground, the picture opens towards the observer with two stone steps, which act as a summons to enter and take part. The scene is canopied by a red drapery and closed off in the background by a rendered stone wall. What happens in this stage-like space is viewed from below. The many relationships of arms and heads to one another produce numerous vertical, horizontal, and diagonal lines within the composition. Some of these run parallel, creating geometrical figures. A triangle of light, formed by the variously illuminated heads of the Father, Son, and Archangel, is the compositional and narrative center of the painting. At the far left, the Mother, her head softly illuminated, observes the proceedings. The miraculous event itself is developed in a plane parallel to that of the picture and oriented towards the viewer without any great illusion of pictorial depth. Only Raphael turns clearly to the front in a three-dimensional gesture, and Tobias's dog simply leaps into the scene, following the direction of our gaze. Light is consciously employed to perform certain functions in terms of both content and composition. The liveliness of the faces and the body, and structure of the clothes derive above all from the application of light and shadow. The unseen source of light is to the upper left, outside the picture. How patiently the head of the old man receives the son's head, with the miraculous medicine borne by the archangel. Raphael hovers over and behind the scene. His face is divided into a light and a dark half. Evidence of how this use of light and shadow is an essential principle of Brandl's pictorial staging. Brandl addressed this subject, the healing of Tobias, in a second, similarly constructed version around 1705. However, this second version, with only 3 central characters, is more abbreviated. It is presented in landscape format and has neither the theatrical character nor the generously conceived, imaginative effect of the more important picture. Yet, in both versions, the event itself and the spiritual contemplation of the miracle have been captured with sensitivity and skill. Peter Johann Brandl was a gifted painter, whose pictures were very popular even during his lifetime. In this self-portrait from 1697, he's still looking at us. Later, however, he led a dissolute life and lost both his health and his property. He finally died in a tavern, poor as a beggar. Around 1700, Brandl painted the picture Jacob Receiving Joseph, which is made vivid by the illuminated heads and the gestural language of the hands. His ability to combine narrative with psychology and atmosphere is already evident here in a painterly, distilled form. Brandl's differentiated treatment of the flesh tones and his particular interest in light and shade, which quite clearly determine the pictorial character of this erotic picture from the Prague National Gallery, The Seduction of Lot by His Daughters, from 1710, he owed to his acquaintance with the Lower Austrian painter Michael Wenzel Halbachs, who worked in Prague and had brought to the north the Italian tenebrism of Caravaggio. The traditional subject of the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary, which Brandl translated into two independent figures around 1715, is lasting proof of his ability as an artist to emphasize particularly the plastic aspects of his figures with his painterly use of light. The same conception of modeling pictorial forms with light and a warm coloristic solution is also evident in the painting Return of the Prodigal Son after 1710, where, in an almost Rembrandtesque manner, the father illuminated from the upper left enfolds the kneeling son in his arms, a scene full of expression and human feeling. The vibrant picture Dream of the Prophet Elijah, 1724, which was originally in the refectory of the Carmelites in Prague, is a lively, very dynamic composition. Predominantly green, brown, and yellowish shades are interwoven in an almost black and white manner. The illumination of the subject from behind, as here, was one of Brandl's most important discoveries. The apostles are painted with a sensitivity of modeling which shows more of the darkness than the light. The frequently restrained, mystical, spiritual character of Brandl's art is perhaps most clearly visible in such delicately painted studies. It was not description, but atmosphere that seemed to have been especially important to him. The elderly Simeon could not die until he had beheld the Saviour. With the presentation of the child in the temple, he already foresaw Christ's passion. Brandl has captured this visionary moment in his picture. This wonderful painting was done with brush, spatula, and his fingers. Brandl was also an excellent portrait painter. We can see in the Portrait of an Elderly Man, 1720, with its rather flat painting method, and Portrait of a Mining Official, around 1728, with its air of strict worthiness and the determined shoves of the brush, the whole palette of his artistic potential. The Healing of the Blind Tobias occupies a key position in the creative work of Brandl, who hardly ever left Bohemia. The fact that it is one of the few works signed by the painter confirms the great significance the work held for Brandl himself. With the beginning of the 14th century, medieval panel painting spread very rapidly throughout Europe, with significant centres established in, amongst other places, Tuscany, France, Germany, and Bohemia. One early, astonishingly good production site arose in Bohemia, where Master Theodoricus had been court painter and the first head of the Brotherhood under Charles IV since 1348. The panel of St. George is by his hand and from his workshop. This work, measuring 117 by 87 centimeters, including the frame, is a frontal depiction of the saint in full armor, with shield, sword, lance, and pennant. With large, wide-open eyes, he gazes into an indeterminate distance, towards an imaginary goal. His mouth slightly open, as if he were about to speak, the erect bearing of the armored figure, and the message in his eyes seem to express an inward agitation and an eager concern. Yet the picture conveys a great tranquility. This is the result of formal, compositional factors. The frontal stance is completely lacking in movement. The body fills the entire width of the pictorial surface from frame to frame, and almost the entire height. Thus, the figure develops a palpable monumentality, combining physical strength and spiritual serenity in its slightly stocky appearance. Above a painted patterned fabric, whose paler colors set it apart from the red background, are a variety of three-dimensional, round, square, and diamond-shaped plaques made of plaster and arranged singly and in rows. These have been built up on the chalk grounding or applied over the painting. This innovative, symbolically laden, decorative motif also appears in the contemporary works from Cologne and the Rhineland. This so-called pastilla technique lends to the two-dimensional painting, which strives to provide a third dimension in the details of the shield, in overlapping elements, and in the modeling of the head, an additional spatial accent. The artist painted the figure on a chalky ground, applied plastically over the picture surface, and therefore it does appear to protrude physically from the depth of the picture. The panel originally hung, until 1959, with a further 126 pictures in the Chapel of the Holy Cross on the Karlstein in Bohemia. Charles IV founded this sanctuary by royal decree on the 27th of March, 1357. The chapel was a place of worship, dedicated to the instruments of Christ's Passion, as well as a secure repository for the Bohemian crown jewels and other treasures of the empire. In intention and in its planned pictorial decoration, it is an image of the heavenly Jerusalem. On the main wall, next to other pictures of Christ and the Virgin Mary, hung the crucifixion, which in view of its rather old-fashioned style, its proportions and its painting technique, may well date from the early period of Theodoricus' work on the Karlstein. Mary's head and posture reveal great emotion. Her hands are so interlocked that the overly long fingers of the right hand hide her left hand. And the sad and pensive head of John conveys an overwhelming sense of emphatic sorrow. This empathy is also visible in the feet of Christ, where the nail's penetration, the ruptured skin and flow of blood express a deeply felt pain. Christ's inclined head with its closed eyes, a sign of death, as well as the tenderly painted beard and the pale body, already point to the international soft style which was to come. Also on the main wall are the pictures of the evangelists, including St. Matthew with his attribute, the angel, who, as the source of inspiration, leans close to his ear. On the side walls, the church fathers arranged, one after another, with popes, bishops and abbots. Here a holy pope with his insignia and holy scripture. A reflective doctor of the church, with his book and quill pen, working. St. John as the evangelist. St. Vitus, seen here as the provincial patron of Bohemia, with his ermine robe and scepter, and at the same time displaying his martyr's palm. St. Elizabeth is feeding an emaciated beggar, who is depicted here in the smaller size appropriate to his significance. At the right edge, according to legend, the Wartburg is shown. According to the world view and the mystical inclination of Charles IV, holy rulers are important representatives of this state of God. The emperor may have identified himself most readily with these figures, like St. Stephen, the King of Hungary, canonized in 1083, an unidentified ruler, perhaps Henry II, canonized in 1146, and above all, with Charlemagne. St. Wenzel, and another unknown emperor, whose coat of arms bears 3 crowns, display the heraldic shield, orbs, and scepters. Master Theodoricus, a Bohemian painter and book illustrator, was probably influenced by Giotto and Italy. He worked on the Karlstein with a number of colleagues, giving every face a certain individuality, despite the large number of figures involved. The sensitive modeling of his painting, the often precise details, the transparently applied colors, and the differentiated attitudes give every picture an effective combination of descriptiveness and aura. Charles IV searched throughout Europe to collect relics associated with all of the saints portrayed here. These relics were previously installed in the frames of the appropriate pictures. Thus, these panel paintings of saints, completed before 1365, were not only symbols of holiness and painted likenesses, but also real representatives of the heavenly world. An intelligent face, with a high forehead and eyes turned to the side, looks into an indeterminate distance. The head, effectively illuminated, shows a fine smile at the corner of the mouth. The body is brought to life with an impasto of yellow, red, and white shades, applied with almost a rubbing motion. His hands, displayed in an elegant, rather feminine manner, he poses in front of a festive background. He sits nonchalantly under a drapery that covers him dramatically, like a formula for sovereign status. The diagonal placement in the room, the arm pointedly supported by the table and the rich furnishings, indicate a portrait of an aristocratic sitter. Yet the genre and the informal attitude of the picture contradict this. In his right hand, adorned with a ring, he holds with his fingertips a fine brush, an allusion to his professional status. In the left, held out before him as if for inspection, a miniature painted on copper. These features characterize the sitter as a painter. It is the Viennese miniature painter Karl Bruni, unknown as an artist, with whom the painter of this large picture, Jan Kupezky, had a special relationship. Bruni was Kupezky's witness at the latter's wedding to Susanne Klaus, daughter of his teacher, in Vienna in January 1710. And he allegedly reproduced many of Kupezky's works or turned his portraits into miniatures. On the table in front of his posed arm, Bruni's palette alludes to the genre of painting. We can see how intensively Kupezky approached the spatial aspects of his picture from the spectacles in the open drawer, their lenses reflecting the studio window opposite. From the context of the picture, we deduce that here the miniaturist Bruni personifies pictura, the spirit of painting, a favorite pictorial motif of the Baroque period. In the background of the picture, a massive column, an obelisk with hieroglyphics, a round temple with sculptural decoration, and a vase overflowing with luxuriant plants emphasize the emblematic character of the scene, and thus the eternal fame of painting. The clear signature and the date of 1709 on the edge of the table below the palette permit the conclusion that we are dealing here with an image representing Kupezky's own fame. As with most portraits by Kupezky, the artist probably painted the face and the body himself, while the surroundings and the drapery were executed by specialist colleagues. According to estimates, Jan Kupezky painted between 1,000 and 1,500 pictures in this manner, chiefly portraits. Sadly, the precise extent of his oeuvre remains largely uncertain. In Rome, where he opened a studio around 1700, Kupezky was already a sought-after portraitist of high society. In 1700, he painted Michael Kreisinger as a young man, looking out from the picture with an alert expression and very full lips. Yet Kupezky, who was said to have not all that attractive an appearance, hardly flattered the sitters in his pictures. That he was concerned to reproduce a true likeness without idealization, and was interested in laying bare the personality and soul of his subjects, is clear in the portrait of the same Michael Kreisinger, painted 30 years later, in 1730. Here he has a rather wild and rough-looking head, which appears to reveal and interpret his character. Nonetheless, the figures in Kupezky's pictures always assume poses favored by the fashion of the day. Kupezky himself looks out with a rather sober skepticism from this self-portrait of 1705. He painted it at the time of his first great successes,